In this podcast, I'm going to be talking about, in this podcast, I'm going to be talking about comparing the inshore fishing in the Gulf versus the inshore fishing in Southern California on the West Coast, comparing what to go for, how to fish for them, which fishery has which place has larger fish, so on and so forth. So let's get into it. So first off, let me explain this background that I have for this. I used to live in Los Angeles for basically my whole life, and now I live in Corpus Christi. So I now have mixed experience between Southern California mostly and the Texas Gulf. And understand that now I've lived here for like 9-10 months, so it's a nice mix up between the two. So when it comes to now let's start from the beginning. Southern California fishing, what is it like? Okay, so Southern California fishing is a lot more structure-based, i.e. you're basically trying to hit certain little pieces of structure, and the fish are a lot more associated to the structure. It's not like Texas where, say, like speckled trouts and reds will be either loosely affiliated with the structure or they'll just be sitting more or less roughly open flats. Like they'll be associated with something, but not directly on a piece of structure. Versus, like, say, a spotted bay bass will sit right on a dock piling, or like a small calico sit right on a dock piling in a harbor, and that's the key. And that's one of the big differences. So now let me actually start off with going into gear. Gear, we use much heavier inshore tackle in Southern California for smaller fish. It is something very simple and goes back to the whole cover and structure piece. So we will use in the harbor what you'd use here for inshore. So, and to be clear, I differ between harbor and inshore fishing. So when it comes to fishing the harbor in Southern California, you're looking at using a setup with, say, 20-30 pound line, 20-30 pound braid, and a 10 to 20 pound leader, and you're throwing, so like here, and you're basically throwing small soft plastics. Some people throw little creature baits like this, although I just kind of got this invention, so I never really used it. Can't really vouch for this particular plastic, but we'll use like this on, like, say, a jig head. This is too light of a jig head out there, so there they'll use like a 1/4 ounce or a 3/8, and occasionally a half. Half being that, like, you want to throw a little bit bigger bait and you want to go a little bit deeper in, say, 20 feet of water. And understand, fishing 20 feet of water is a thing in that area, fishing a harbor in Southern California. So that's the other part of it. You're fishing usually a lot deeper water on average. Like I could catch a spotted bay bass in a foot or two of water if I really wanted to, or a couple feet of water, more or less. It's more like a couple feet of water what I'm thinking of. But you can catch a spotted bay bass in a couple feet of water, sure. But a lot of the time you're going to catch your saltwater bass and your inshore fish in deeper water. We just have access to deeper water much easier. Calicos are the same way. You can theoretically catch one near a boiler rock in a couple feet of water, but you can also catch one 100 feet down off a wreck, or off like a bottom structure piece, or off an oil rig. So it kind of just varies. So that is a big difference versus, say, in Texas, and then you're fishing the Gulf, or you're fishing inshore here. It's two different worlds of inshore fishing. And by the way, I consider offshore fishing here, what most people consider offshore here, like in 80, 100 feet of water, inshore over there in Southern California. So what I mean by that is, say you're fishing an oil rig in about 80 feet of water, and when you fish that oil rig in 80 feet of water, that is, I would consider inshore, even though it's not technically seen as inshore here. And basically, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I'm going to Dan Hernandez, his definition of inshore, which is a good one. Anything 100 foot or less of water. So if you're fishing out on an island, and it may be seen as offshore because you're going off the shelf, but at the same time you're going back and, say, 10, 20 feet of water, that would be seen as inshore. You're chasing barracudas on a reef in 40 feet of water, that would be seen as inshore. So my point being there is So just have that in mind as I'm going over this. So inshore, so that being said, it's two different styles of inshore fishing. You can fish a harbor in 20 feet of water with a swim bait for spotted bay bass if you really wanted to. So that is what we would do there. So now going back to the gear that suits that. When it comes to our plastics and jig heads, 1/4 ounce to a 1/2 ounce. So a little bit heavier, but not really. So 1/4 ounce to a 1/2 ounce, that 20 to 30 pound braid, that 10 to 20 pound leader, mono or fluorocarbon. We're not very picky, and but the water is usually pretty clear, so it's not a bad idea to have fluorocarbon. And understand, you lose a lot more stuff doing this too. So have in mind that's the reason why you have that decently heavy setup for fish. That I have in mind, a lifetime spotted bay bass for a lot of people is like 3 pounds. These are not very big fish. 3 pounds is a lifetime one. You get all excited over a 1.5 or 2. Calico bass in the harbor are also not going to maybe hit. There may be like a sheer coincidence where you get one that's 5 or 6, but most people are not going to get that. Most people in the harbor are just going to get a 2 or 3 pound bass at the very most. So these are not very big fish you're trying to target. You may occasionally get a halibut, but usually halibut are going to be staying in open water, so you can take your time, you can fight them, and you can loosen down the drag and you have fun with it. And that's by a sheer accident if you actually catch a halibut. Which is a lot of fun when you do it though. So understand, our inshore fishing, when we do this, is for halibut, spotted bay bass, sand bass, calico bass, barred sand bass, same idea. You're not going to find very big ones in the harbor. Now, what I mean by harbor, now let me take that for a reference. Harbor fishing is that gear I just mentioned, that 20 to 30 pound braid, that 10 to 20 pound mono. But when it comes to the actual inshore that we have for the same species, your calico bass, sand bass, spotted bay bass, halibut, maybe if you accidentally hook a small white sea bass on that too, if you accidentally hook a small yellowtail, which I've done on swim baits, which, understand, are yellowtail not yellowtail snappers. They are yellowtail, they'll kind of like an amberjack, like a small amberjack. And when you have that in mind, basically you're using a heavier gear. The reason for it is same idea as the harbor. You were trying to get these fish out of structure. This is a muscling type fishery. It's kind of like in Florida where people go for the shallow water grouper, like in Baja where people go for the grouper. Same idea. So you will be fishing grass. And this is one thing I like to brag about to people here, which is you'll be grass fishing for calico bass essentially. In about 30 feet of water, it comes from the bottom of 30 feet all the way up and it laps over. It is the coolest thing. And so you have to learn to fish that, as well as you're fishing boiler rocks, which essentially is for those of you who don't know, is a rock that is half submerged in water, like near the surf usually, and waves and swells are bashing up against it. So you have to deal with both those as heavy structure settings. And unlike a largemouth, these calicos and their sand bass, spotted bay bass, all alike, will essentially take the bait. When you set the hook, they will run right back into wherever they came from. So that's why we use, now understand, this is going to be a big jump, 50 to 65. 50 to 65 pound braid. I go a bit lighter, I use a 50. But also I use smaller baits, I usually catch smaller fish. That's just the way I like to fish. 50 to 65 pound braid. We will use gutsy reels with 20 pounds, a stupid amount of drag, 20 pounds. I have an Aura inshore that can have 20 pounds of drag on it for that purpose. Leaders, I usually go 20 to 40, but I've heard of some people doing 50 and 60 pound mono leaders for calicos. I'm just no. Only reason I may want a 50 or 60 is if you're throwing surface irons and you want to have enough cushion for a big lure like that, a 2 ounce, 3 ounce lure. That makes sense. And I'll get to actually difference in lures in just a second here. That just came across my head. So that is another big thing. So fishing 30 feet of water as an inshore fishery is not uncommon here. Versus, understand, for most people in the Gulf, that is seen as essentially blasphemy. Like, no one fishes more than 10 feet of water usually. In fact, you can catch a red that's 6 pounds in a foot of water. And I thought that was the coolest thing when I came here. I saw this red in shallow water, saw him curl. I figured he had my jig, got him. And that is definitely a very enjoyable thing if you can get away with it. So that is the big difference. And that's the thing. So in the Gulf, you're usually fishing shallower water, and fish that usually you would find in decently deep water, you would find in like 9 to 15 feet of water, which for us is like, 15 feet, that's nothing. For us here, it's like the Marianas Trench. I even make that joke in the link below in the article where it's like the 5 feet under the bridge I fished that one day was essentially like the Marianas Trench. Because understand, everything around it in Oso Bay is a foot or two of water. You can have someone, which is another cool thing I like about this place. You can see people wade out 1,000 yards and it will still be not even waist deep. Like, that is the thing here. In Southern California, you will not do that for 2 reasons. 1, the water's too freaking cold. 2, and most people are not crazy enough to go do that. And 2, you essentially have, you don't, like I said, you're not fishing super shallow water, so you can't get away with it. You can't really wade fish in 20, 30 feet of water. It doesn't really work that way. So with that in mind, so that is a big key difference. The depth you are fishing and if you are fishing structure or not. When I mentioned the lures, the idea of lures that popped in my head, there's different styles of lures to achieve the same goal. It's a very interesting thing. So over here, you can get bit on a top water without a problem, which is a lot of fun. I definitely enjoy that. It can be like November, and you can practice fishing a popper, and you can see a couple blowups on it at night, and it is fun. So, and also fishing all kinds of hard baits is a lot easier here than it is in the Southern California. Southern California, you have to kind of gauge it. Some people throw crankbaits and stuff, but a lot of people just are lazy and just don't practice crankbait fishing for spotties, and they'll just throw soft plastics. And so yeah, so no one really throws. So people throw hard baits, but not to the same caliber as you would here. And then on top, and also people here throw soft plastics too. And on top of that, have in mind that when you are fishing, so let me put it this way. So lures, surface iron's a big thing there. Here, no one even knows what you're talking about. They're like, a surface iron? What is that? For those of you who don't know, if you're listening to this, a surface iron is a big, hollow, clunky metal jig. We cast it out, and you fish it on a side-to-side ski. Or it kind of goes, it's like a zigzag in the water if you fish it right. A mega bait does the same thing. If you want to practice doing this, take a 1-ounce P-line laser minnow, or like a 1-ounce metal jig that's like that. Cast it out on, say, 10, 12-pound mono, which most people out here have. Make a nice long cast, and then just practice that. You can practice the same technique while using a downsized lure for targeting inshore. Like here, you could probably catch specks on that. I mean, I've snagged a speck on one of this, so it wouldn't surprise me if you do that. And also, so that is the thing. Lure selection. Like I said, you could theoretically encounter a yellowtail. You could possibly use a topwater on it. If they're boiling and they're all active and crazy, you could probably use a topwater in it. But just a lot of people just use surface irons instead. So it's just a matter of encountering this. Or like, for example, here, when guys go on the jetties, you probably could use a surface iron there for, say, Spanish mackerel or Jack Crevalle here. But people don't really use it. They'll use like a spoon. They'll jig a spoon, which to me, is not my speed, but they'll use like other kinds of lures, but they just will not they don't even know what a surface iron is. Or they may have heard of it at one time, or like this one little story I have with this, I talked to a tackle shop guy here, and he's like, I asked me if you guys have any surface irons just for curiosity. He's like, no, he's like, you're not from here, are you? I'm like, yeah. So that's just how big of a difference is here. And for us, surface irons are in every single tackle shop in Southern California. And a whole rack of them too. So that is another big difference between the two in terms of lures. That's just a good example. Soft plastics are universal. So a swim bait and jig head, I don't care where you go, it is used. Here it is used as well as in Southern California. Here they use a lot more of like twitching soft plastics, like your like gulp shrimps. I know we use them there too, but not really as much of a thing. That's the other thing. Saltwater drop shots. Saltwater drop shot is not as much of a thing here as I would, from my personal experience of trying to use one. A saltwater drop shot is not the same usage here as it would be in Southern California. The reason for it is when I use a drop shot, say like a 1 ounce sinker, I pitch it to pilings. So I can have it, I use that 1 ounce so I can anchor it right to the piling where the spotty might be or the calico might be or sand bass or whatever, and they'll come up and will eat it. 12 inches off the bottom or whatever, however much you have it, 12, 11, 10 inches off the bottom, depends on when you tied. Here, because the speckled trout, for example, in the same style of fishery are loosely affiliated with the dock, there is no need for a drop shot. In fact, it's almost a waste of time because you can just cover more water with a swim bait and jig head to do the same thing. So it's almost like counterproductive in order to do it. And also ribbon fish, when you're fishing the harbors, will eat a swim bait too. They don't really like slow-moving baits. They want something decently quick. And if you've never caught a ribbon fish, they are the coolest looking thing. It's like an oarfish with halibut teeth. It is cool. And they will eat twitch baits. I don't think I've gone one on top water, but I wouldn't be surprised if they ate a top water. Like the hard twitch baits, swim baits. They probably might even eat a bucktail jig too. These are not very picky fish. So that's in mind. So have that in mind. And then that's a big piece of it. Lure differentiation and how lures are used. However, going back to that point about dock fishing. Dock fishing's all a good strategy, and I use this as referencing between the two coasts a lot. When you're fishing Southern California and you're fishing docks, I did this also in Seattle when you go fish for rockfish. When you're fishing Southern California and you're fishing the docks, you pitch a drop shot to the dock, you want to get to the exact piling. Seattle, so long as there's structure on the bottom, rockfish will be there. And that's a fun fishery too, because you're fishing artificials, you're bouncing drop shots off the bottom. And essentially now you're fishing these big dock pilings. You're fishing right next to them. Here, you can pitch to dock pilings and catch fish like speckled trout, for example. And what will happen is the speckled trout will be loosely affiliated with the dock, like I said before. So there's no need to pitch a drop shot and anchor it right there. You're better off just as long as you just get under the dock, basically, there's a good chance you'll get bit. Other thing that just hit my head, these are just topics just flow. Tide. Tide is a lot more of a thing in Southern California than it is here. Our tide, we get about half-foot swings, so it is almost a useless thing because there's not enough of a tide swing to make a difference. In Southern California, 3 to 4 foot swings every 6 hours is not uncommon. With maybe like a high being like a 5 foot swing. Well, all I mean by a tide swing, just if you don't know, is basically when the tide pulls away the water, is essentially is for every shift of tide. So like say your tide goes in, like an ingoing tide takes 6 hours, that'd be a swing, a 6 hour swing. When the tide goes out, that is another 6 hour swing. So on and so forth. And that usually, the amount of time actually just varies depending on where you go, like where you live. So in California, it's every 6 hours, it goes every 6 hours. So 6 hours goes in, next 6 hours goes out, and so on and so forth. Then as you're sitting somewhere for a day of fishing, you can see that. Overall, now if I had to pick somewhere that's just easier to get bit, and also is a better chance of catching larger fish, I would probably say, if I had to pick, I would probably say, probably the Gulf, honestly, because saltwater bass fishing in the harbors and halibut fishing, You have to take your time. You have to pick it apart. There are certain times when you're fishing in the Gulf where that is almost unnecessary and is great. So, like, if you know the right docks to go under, where they put the lights out, you will see a bunch of fish under it, and that is great. Just overall, just sometimes just easier to get bit in something in the Gulf. Also, the effort to big fish shot ratio, for example. So, like, the amount of money and effort you have to do to go on a boat or whatever, or to go out somewhere and go catch a big fish, is probably easier here in the Gulf, because I've seen guys land 20 to 30 pound black drum off a dock. I've lost one that was 8-10 pounds just walking distance from my place. So it is pretty easy. It is not uncommon to encounter a decent sized fish versus fishing the harbors. Like I said before, fishing the harbors, the biggest spot of bait bass you might encounter is like a 3-pounder, maybe a 4, and then you jump for joy, knowing that might be your personal best. And halibut, there's a freak accident, like a super freak accident where guys are fishing for bass and they'll hook like a 20-30, but I have personally never done that. Most halibut that I've encountered in the harbor have been within a couple of pounds. I think my biggest in a harbor was like 5 pounds. So most halibut are not very big. In fact, most of the ones you get in the harbor when you're fishing for bass by accident are usually under the legal size limit. And usually to encounter a legal halibut, you have to go with someone that actually knows what they're doing. It's a full-on in Denver. Or you just have sheer dumb luck for that day. So that is a big difference. Oh, other one. Speaking of halibut and bottomfish, there's a lot more bottom-oriented fishing, the way that I've just fished in Southern California, than the Gulf. Because understand, like being loosely affiliated with the docks and the structure, as specks would be here, speckled trout and redfish will have no problem going all the way up, like subsurface essentially. So, like I said, you can get them on top water here, and it's fun. Walking baits are good. I've gone a couple of fish on poppers. And there's a lot more subsurface fishing here, opportunities, than there is in Southern California. To kind of go back to the idea of why there was just so much of why there was such a difference. Yeah, so, but definitely both fisheries, West Coast and the Gulf, are worth giving a try. Pack some travel rods, as this channel promotes, obviously. And as I always encourage people, pack a travel rod. You never know when the next fishing adventure might be for a couple hours and ends up being a blast. So, if you like this kind of content, comparing completely different coasts and 2 different fisheries, let me know. And also, if there is anywhere else you want me to compare right now, the US, please let me know. Leave a comment on that. Subscribe if you like this content. Give it a like. All that good stuff. And notifications, just so you know when I go live. It's kind of just last spur of the moment. All right, guys. Catch some nice fish and have a good day.